Good morning. I see Chris is the first to show up. So, good morning, Chris. Hello from California. I'll give a few more moments and we'll see who else wanders in. For those of you who are wandering through this at some other point, like on YouTube or something, I'm Tad. I will be reading until approximately 2 a.m. It is 1 a.m. now in California, in the middle of California, to which we have just returned a couple of days ago after travel. I will tell you more about that in just a moment. And any other tales that need to be told. There's nothing particularly dramatic, so there's nothing particularly scary, exciting, or anything to tell you about, except for the fact that we've been traveling and come back. And it's about the size of it. Let's see. All right, we got a few folks showing up now. So I see Petra is also here, and Ilva, hello, darling, and Carol, and Wouter. Hello, hello. Wouter is sending his greetings from the lazy autumnal Netherlands, which sounds actually quite nice. We were just most recently in the lazy autumnal New England and New York. And we got very lucky actually. We missed the really hot weather here in California, which we had for much of the week. And for California, especially Northern California, it was scary hot, like 97 degrees and up into the hundreds even occasionally, which I know to some people who were going through the worst of the summer in places like Arizona and Texas. I know that won't sound like much, and I'm not trying to claim it's equally onerous on the folks, but it was still pretty miserable. Our daughter was here taking care of the animals and stuff, and she was not happy. She and I are not hot weather people. Actually, I'm not a cold weather person. I'm just kind of a wuss when it comes to weather. I mean, I didn't realize until I had become an adult and had lived some other places how attuned to California's moderate weather I am. And then I spent part of a winter in Wisconsin, which is in the American Midwest on the Great Lakes, and is cold as the proverbial, whichever proverb you tend to move toward, whether that be the udders of witches or the testicular framework of brass monkeys. But it was that cold. It was horribly cold. And I never got used to that. And the idea of having to get up every day and shovel your driveway just so you could drive to work, appalling. I'm a lightweight. I confess it. And I don't like hot weather either. I mean, if you look at this pale complected individual, all of the genetic research we've done in our family and the other kinds of genealogy research, all I know for certain about everything that I do know is that all of my ancestors lived in cold, dark, northern places. They were like Scandinavia, northern Germany, England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland. We're pale. We're pale, and we don't like a lot of sun, and we're not crazy about cold either, but we were used to cold at least. We were never used to sun. And in my first marriage, my ex was a Southern Californian and loved to go to the beach, and I loathed it. I loathed that I would sit there for like 20 minutes and just go, my head hurts. I'm not happy. I'm miserable. I'm already sunburned. Like that quick, boom. And so yeah, I'm kind of a lightweight when it comes to weather. So we missed the wretched heat wave here, and fortunately for us, unfortunately for those who were not lucky enough to be traveling. And we flew into New York, but we drove immediately to Connecticut to see some friends there. Dear old friend of Deb's, but also a good friend of mine and her husband. And we hung out with them in Connecticut for a few days and walked around and enjoyed the autumnal weather. The trees have just started to change in New England, so there were little bits of orange and yellow and red, but it hasn't gone into the full um, autumn foliage change. So I hope we can get back again. I haven't seen that for years, but it is quite striking. And then we went on to New York and hung out with my publisher, Betsy Walheim, and her husband, Peter Stamfel, who are also two of our very favorite people. And yeah, this is next year, 2025, will be my 40th year since I sold my first book to Daw, for whom I still write and with whom I still publish, which is shocking. It's shocking to me. But you know, this is what all what all older people say is like, what happened? I don't feel any different, but you know, like decades have gone past and things that like people are now all nostalgic about the, you know, the 90s or the early 2000s, you know, well, that's because the current generation of adults from those eras who grew up in those eras have just gotten old enough to begin to feel nostalgia. But as far as I'm concerned, all that stuff happened way late, you know. So it's the strange position of sitting around going, wow, I guess I've had most of a life. Like if I kicked over dead, I'm not intending to, by the way. My health, as far as I know, is very good. But if I was to suddenly just pitch over dead, nobody would say, oh, he was cheated of life, you know. I mean, he didn't get enough of it. You know, in the past, go back a few hundred years, and at my age, I would be a venerable old graybeard of the village, and everybody would walk quietly around me so as not to disturb me, and would only occasionally come to me with questions like, when was the last blizzard? You know, things like that. And I go, oh, yes, I remember it well. Many years ago, yeah, blah, you know, I mean, that's so, but here I am. I don't feel like it, but I'm an old guy now, and there's worse things to be. Certainly, the alternative is not all that exciting. I got over the live fast, die young, and leave a beautiful corpse thing a long time ago. Not least because I got past the point where I was going to be able to leave a good-looking corpse behind. So anyway, so we spent time with Betsy and Peter and heard about Peter's most recent musical forays, because Peter is a musician and an important one. Although his history is known only to people who are pretty into music, but he played for the Fugs. He was part of the Fugs band back in the 60s, and then he started a band called the Holy Modal Rounders, which showed up on the Easy Rider soundtrack, with Peter's absolutely inimitable vocal stylings, and there's nobody who vocalizes like Peter Stamfel. He's an amazing guy. Anyway, so we spent time with them, and then we hopped on a plane and came back and greeted the dogs. Johnny, I realized today Johnny's still nervous, but I realized it's because I haven't unpacked the suitcase. It's still sitting on the floor, you know, with the clothes in it from when I came back, because I have to sort through it, and I've had a lot of other stuff to do since we returned. And I realized Johnny's having to walk past that suitcase every day. And he's not entirely certain until the suitcase goes away that the time of danger is past. So I keep, idiot that I am, communicator that I am by nature, I keep walking past him and going, it's okay. The suitcase is now, it's not important anymore. I'm going to put it away. Don't worry. We're not going anywhere. I'm here for a while. Don't fret. And Johnny just gives me the big brown dog eyes like, I'm not sure I can trust you right now. So it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that long a trip for a dog to have to put up with, but Johnny does not like it when we go out of town. Walter, of course, damn near senile, you know, just kind of puttering along. All he wants is a warm body to crawl in next to at night, and his food. You know, he doesn't know about the medication he also has to get because he's so old and messed up. But he doesn't, you know, that's all he cares about, bless him. He's just Walter, you know, Walter the Chihuahua, and that's all he wants is just a warm body and occasional kindness and food. But Johnny, as my daughter and I were talking about last night, we have never been around a dog who is so emotionally complicated
And he really is. He is like he would totally be an emo dog if there were, these kinds of things existed for animals. He would be an emo. He'd have his hair halfway over his eyes, and he'd be like all, yeah, sure, whatever, man, life sucks. And he's not a dog that trusts that things are going to be good. Despite the fact that he has been surrounded by love and petting and food and everything, since we first got him. But either he's just a dog that's naturally worried, or he had some god awful experiences, in his formative months before we got him. Because certainly the woman who fostered him was a very nice person, and I don't think I've ever raised my voice to Johnny, because it's so clear that he would never get over it if I yelled at him. I mean, he already, when something goes wrong, if we even talk in a loud voice, like if and we're a noisy family, my whole family, we're noisy. We are the most Mediterranean wasps you will ever see. We talk loudly, we gesture with our hands, we get very loud at the dinner table. But if we get loud, Johnny gets worried. For Johnny, loud seems to mean divorce, fighting, anger, whatever. So, we'll be just like laughing at the table about something, and then there's all of a sudden there's this big old dog pop pulling down on your arm, like, Dad, don't get a divorce. Don't get a divorce. I'm like, Johnny, no, it's okay. We're just having fun. Nobody's getting divorced here. Nobody is angry at anybody. We're just being noisy. But he'll keep coming over and pawing at me if it doesn't get quiet. So he's a very strange dog. I've never lived with an animal who was as emotionally, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a good word, not motile, but anyway, it'll come to me. But yeah, he's the most changeable, emotional, like wears his emotions on his sleeves animal. Well, he has no sleeves because he's a dog, but you know what I mean. Anyway, okay, so let me just check in and see who has showed up, and then we will start to get toward reading. And who has commented? Melissa Fuller has commented. Mahmoud Koklu has. By the way, Mahmoud, you're going to have to tell me someday how to pronounce your last name properly, because I don't know enough Turkish people to know how to pronounce Turkish names well. So I'll say Koklu, but I'm not sure. Pierre Danger Fuqua is here. Becky Willems, hello. Isaac, whoops, good to see you. Ivan, my buddy, good to see you, buddy. Sandra, hello. Johnny Awa, nice to have you, Johnny. Julian should be. Kretschmar. Christina is here. Brad, whoop, there's a name I haven't seen before, I don't think. And if I have, I apologize, Brad. Petra is here. And Ilva, of course, my dear and faithful friend. Nikki. Chetwind is here. Chris Fobb was the first person to write anything tonight. Mark Redman is here. Olaf is here. My buddy Olaf is checking in. Nicole Grass and two more. Mabuba Tuli is a name I see here. And the comment is hello, and I say hello back. Nice to have you with us. And yeah, that's basically it. So anything else I want to tell you? Yeah, so it was a nice trip. I'm get increasingly hermity as I get older. It's not agoraphobia. I mean, anybody who, if you know what agoraphobia is, I actually have had experience with agoraphobic people in my life. And literally, it comes from the agora, the Greek word for marketplace. It means fear of the marketplace. But basically, people who are agoraphobic are the kind of people who don't like to go out anywhere. Maybe they have a safe space. God, I hope they do. Like their home or something, and they don't like to go out. I am very hermitish, or hermit-esque, or hermitly, or hermit-like. No, hermitly would be an adverb. I would have to do things hermitly. But anyway, I do tend to be pretty much, buckled down at home most of the time. And, because I kind of work every day. I don't work all day every day, but I kind of work every day. But but I'm perfectly happy to be out in the world, and I loved being back in New York. I mean, Connecticut was also beautiful, and seeing our friends there was great. But you know, New York, one of the biggest cities in the world, one of the most happening places in the world. I love getting out and walking around in New York and just seeing the legions of people. You know, the street life, the just the sheer multitude that is out, you know, running around doing things in New York, the 24-hour nature of it. So it's not agoraphobia. No, I'm just somebody who basically most of the time feels like I'm behind. I've been behind for 30, 40, 50 years now, so that's not surprising. The only thing I can do to make myself feel better about being behind is try and whittle away some of the work that I have waiting for me. Three, the fact that I can't work all the time. You know, I'm my own boss, and I probably work more than I ever did with actual bosses, but can't work all the time. So since I kind of tend to work some every day, I also have to take my vacations and weekends during, you know, little bits at a time. And then, of course, I always feel guilty about that because I'm not working and I'm already, you know, I'm decades behind. I have all these books I would like to write before I finally pop my clogs, as we used to say in England, or shuffle off the perch, or whatever expression, cute expression for getting snuffed, you might want to use. I've got all these books I want to write, including some that aren't even really fantasy and science fiction. Excuse me. But of course, you know, you can only get so much done. I'm sure there isn't an artist in the world, and I'm using the term very broadly when I consider myself an artist because I don't think anybody really knows where the delineation is between art and craft. But to the extent that I aspire towards artistry, I don't think there probably is any such thing as an artist who hits the end of their road, as it were, and their last thought went, "Well, I finished everything I wanted to finish." No, no. The nature of the beast is that you continue to come up with ideas, and when you have an idea that you really like, you're excited about it and you want to work on it. That's always the most exciting thing. You know, people used to ask me, you know, well, which is your favorite book? Well, my favorite book is the one I'm working on right now because that's alive. I've made the comparison in the past for dogs and tennis balls. You know, that's the live tennis ball. That's the one that I'm currently having thrown for me and I'm chasing after. So, you know, I will never get finished. I will never get caught up. It's a hard fact that I had to learn some decades ago in the middle of a stress out when I actually started losing words. This was many years ago. This was 30 years ago in England. But so anyway, so yeah, so that's basically where I'm at, and I've already wasted huge amounts of time babbling, but that's where it's at. So we're in good shape. Deb's in good shape. I'm in good shape. We are the dogs are happy to have us back, if only in Walter's case because there are more warm bodies to choose from. In Johnny's case, it's very genuine. It's like he really needs his pack. He's very like he's still getting used to the fact that we don't have four kids living at home anymore. He's still troubled by that. And when any of them come back to visit, he's like really worried when they leave again. You know, like maybe that was the last time I'll ever see them. You know, I mean, it's touching, but it's also stressful on the poor dog. Okay, so anyway, I am going to go back to reading from The Sword and the Stone, which, as most of you know, is the first part of The Once and Future King by T.H. White. And what we have had so far is we have been introduced to Wirt, who is the young Arthur, and his, what do we call him, his guardian, Sir Ector, and Sir Ector's son, Kay, who is, in a sense, Wirt's older brother, even though they're not related. Kay is an interesting character in T.H. White's version. And they have gone out to try and fetch back the falcon. The peregrine, I believe. No, maybe he's a goshawk. No, Cully is a goshawk. Anyway, they've gone out to, and because Kay has foolishly let the hawk fly too soon, and as a result, the hawk has just kept going from tree to tree, and they follow him throughout the day trying to get him back, and then Kay finally gives up. Wart stays behind because he can't bear to think of how upset Hob, who is the ostringer, the person who's in charge of the birds, and Wart, who is very soft-hearted, can't bear to think of how upset Hob will be if they don't bring back Cully, this hawk. And so during the night, somebody, we presume a bandit of some sort, shoots some arrows at Wart, and he has to run away. And then, of course, he's lost track of Cully. When he wakes up in the morning, he finds himself in front of a little cottage. Inside that cottage, we finally meet Merlin. Merlin is in a very wonderful, exciting place full of all kinds of exciting, weird things, which very much was an inspiration for the Chambers of Dr. Morganis in my book. I mean, I don't even know if you could call it an homage. I mean, in a sense, it's kind of a direct steal, but it definitely was a huge influence. And Merlin introduces him to Archimedes the owl, and who can talk. And then near the end of the process, after Wart has had breakfast and everything with Merlin, Merlin announces that he is going to go back with Wart to Sir Ector's castle in the Forest Sauvage, and he is going to be the boy's tutor. And that was the end of that chapter. And now we are starting the next one. So this is chapter 4 of The Sword and the Stone. The Wart started talking before he was halfway over the drawbridge. "Look who I have brought," he said. "Look, I have been on a quest. I was shot at with 3 arrows. They had black and yellow stripes. The owl is called Archimedes. I saw King Pellinore. This is my tutor, Merlin. I went on a quest for him. He was after the questing beast. I mean King Pellinore. It was terrible in the forest. Merlin made the plates wash up. Hello, Hob. Look, we've got Cully." Hob just looked at the Wart, but so proudly that the Wart went quite red. It was such a pleasure to be back home again with all his friends and everything achieved. Hob said gruffly, "Master, I shall make an ostringer of you yet." He came for Cully, as if he could not keep his hands off him longer, but he patted the Wart too, fondling them both because he was not sure which he was gladder to see back. He took Cully on his own fist, reassuming him like a lame man putting on his accustomed wooden leg after it had been lost. "Merlin caught him," said the Wart. "He sent Archimedes to look for him on the way home. Then Archimedes told us that he had been and killed a pigeon and was eating it. We went and frightened him off. After that, Merlin stuck 6 of the tail feathers round the pigeon in a circle and made a loop in a long piece of string to go round the feathers. He tied one end to a stick in the ground, and we went away behind a bush with the other end. He said he would not use magic. He said you could not use magic in the great arts, just as it would be unfair to make a great statue by magic. You have to cut it out with a chisel, you see? Then Cully came down to finish the pigeon, and we pulled the string, and the loop slipped over his feathers and caught him round the legs. He was angry, but we gave him the pigeon." Hob made a duty to Merlin, who returned it courteously. They looked upon one another with grave affection, knowing each other to be masters of the same trade. When they could be alone together, they would talk about falconry, although Hob was naturally a silent man. Meanwhile, they must wait their time. "Oh, Kay!" cried the Wart, as the latter appeared with their nurse and other delighted welcomers. "Look, I have got a magician for our tutor. He has a mustard pot that walks." "I am glad you're back," said Kay. "Alas, where did you sleep, Master Art?" exclaimed the nurse. "Look at your clean jerkin, all muddied and torn. Such a turn as you gave us, I really don't know. But look at your poor hair with all them twigs in it. Oh, my own random, wicked little lamb." Sir Hector came out, bustling, with his greaves on back to front, and kissed the wart on both cheeks.
"Well, well, well," he exclaimed moistly. "Here we are again, eh? What the devil have we been doing, eh? Setting the whole household upside down."
But inside himself he was proud of the wart for staying out after a hawk, and prouder still to see that he had got it, for all the while Hob held the bird in the air for everybody to see. "Oh, sir," said the wart, "I have been on that quest you said for a tutor, and I found him. Please, he is this gentleman here, and he is called Merlin. He has got some badgers and hedgehogs and mice and ants and things on this white donkey here, because we could not leave them behind to starve. He is a great magician and can make things come out of the air."
"Ah, a magician," said Sir Ector, putting on his glasses and looking closely at Merlin. "White magic, I hope?"
"Assuredly," said Merlin, who stood patiently among the throng, with his arms folded in his necromantic gown, while Archimedes sat very stiff and elongated on the top of his head.
"Ought to have some testimonials," said Sir Ector doubtfully. "It's usual."
"Testimonials," said Merlin, holding out his hand. Instantly there were some heavy tablets in it, signed by Aristotle, a parchment signed by Hecate, and some typewritten duplicates signed by the master of Trinity College, who could not remember having met him. All these gave Merlin an excellent character.
"He had 'em up his sleeve," said Sir Ector wisely. "Can you do anything else?"
"Tree," said Merlin. At once there was an enormous mulberry growing in the middle of the courtyard, with its luscious blue fruits ready to patter down. This was all the more remarkable, since mulberries only became popular in the days of Cromwell.
"They do it with mirrors," said Sir Ector.
"Snow," said Merlin. "And an umbrella," he added hastily. Before they could turn round, the copper sky of summer had assumed a cold and lowering bronze, while the biggest white flakes that ever were seen were floating about them and settling on the battlements. An inch of snow had fallen before they could speak, and all were trembling with the wintry blast. Sir Ector's nose was blue and had an icicle hanging from the end of it, while all except Merlin had a ledge of snow upon their shoulders. Merlin stood in the middle, holding his umbrella high because of the owl.
"It's done by hypnotism," said Sir Ector with chattering teeth. "Like those wallahs from the Indies. But that'll do," he added hastily. "That'll do very well. I'm sure you'll make an excellent tutor for teaching these boys."
The snow stopped immediately, and the sun came out. "Enough to give a body a pneumonia," said the nurse, "or to frighten the elastic commissioners," while Merlin folded up his umbrella and handed it back to the air, which received it.
"Imagine the boy doing a quest like that by himself!" exclaimed Sir Ector. "Well, well, well, wonders never cease."
"I do not think much of it as a quest," said Kay. "He only went after the hawk, after all."
"And got the hawk, Master Kay?"
said Hob reprovingly.
"Oh, well," said Kay, "I bet the old man caught it for him." "Kay," said Merlin, suddenly terrible, "thou wast ever a proud and ill-tongued speaker, and a misfortunate one. Thy sorrow will come from thine own mouth."
At this, everybody felt uncomfortable, and Kay, instead of flying into his usual passion, hung his head. He was not at all an unpleasant person, really, but clever, quick, proud, passionate, and ambitious. He was one of those people who would be neither a follower nor a leader, but only an aspiring heart, impatient in the failing body which imprisoned it. Merlin repented of his rudeness at once. He made a little silver hunting knife come out of the air, which he gave him to put things right. The knob of the handle was made of the skull of a stoat, oiled and polished like ivory, and Kay loved it. Chapter 5. Sir Ector's home was called the Castle of the Forest Sauvage. It was more like a town or a village than any one man's home, and indeed it was the village during times of danger, for this part of the story is one which deals with troubled times. Whenever there was a raid or an invasion by some neighboring tyrant, everybody on the estate hurried into the castle, driving the beasts before them into the courts, and there they remained until the danger was over. The wattle and daub cottages nearly always got burned and had to be rebuilt afterward with much profanity. For this reason, it was not worthwhile to have a village church, as it would constantly be having to be replaced. The villagers went to church in the chapel of the castle. They wore their best clothes and trooped up the street with their most respectable gait on Sundays, looking with vague and dignified looks in all direction, as if reluctant to disclose their destination. And on weekdays they came to Mass and Vespers in their ordinary clothes, walking much more cheerfully. Everybody went to church in those days, and liked it. The castle of the Forest Sauvage is still standing, and you can see its lovely ruined walls with ivy on them, standing broached to the sun and wind. Some lizards live there now, and the starving sparrows keep warm on winter nights in the ivy, and a barn owl drives it methodically, hovering outside the frightened congregations and beating the ivy with its wings to make them fly out. Most of the curtain wall is down, though you can trace the foundations of the 12 round towers which guarded it. They were round, and stuck out from the wall into the moat so that the archers could shoot in all directions and command every part of the wall. Inside the towers there are circular stairs. These go round and round a central column, and this column is pierced with holes for shooting arrows. Even if the enemy had got inside the curtain wall and fought their way into the bottom of the towers, the defenders could retreat up the bends of the stairs and shoot at those who followed them up inside through these slits. The stone part of the drawbridge, with its barbican, and the bartizans of the gatehouse, are in good repair. These have many ingenious arrangements. Even if enemies got over the wooden bridge, which was pulled up so that they could not, there was a portcullis weighted with an enormous log which would squash them flat and pin them down as well. There was a large hidden trap door in the floor of the barbican, which would let them into the moat after all. At the other end of the barbican there was another portcullis, so that they could be trapped between the two and annihilated from above, while the bartizans, or hanging turrets, had holes in their floors through which the defenders could drop things on their heads. Finally, inside the gatehouse there was a neat little hole in the middle of the vaulted ceiling, which had painted tracery and bosses. This hole led to the room above, where there was a big cauldron for boiling lead or oil. So much for the outer defenses. Once you were inside the curtain wall, you found yourself in a kind of wide alleyway, probably full of frightened sheep, with another complete castle in front of you. This was the inner shell keep, with its 8 enormous round towers which still stand. It is lovely to climb the highest of them and to lie there looking out toward the marches from which some of these old dangers came, with nothing but the sun above you and the little tourists trotting out below, quite regardless of arrows and boiling oil. By the way, a brief parenthetical, when it says the marches, almost positive that White is talking about the Welsh marches, and indeed some of the very finest Norman castles were built along the edges of the Welsh marches, because the Welsh, those naughty people, were very resistant to the Normans, and so some of the biggest and most famous castles, like Caerphilly and various others, are built along the edge. March in this sense, like my own book Shadow March, or like Mark in German and things like that, basically is the border, the the end of a territory, the beginning of another territory. So where was we? Looking out toward the marches from which some of these old dangers came, with nothing but the sun above you and the little tourists trotting about below, quite regardless of arrows and boiling oil. Think for how many centuries that unconquerable tower has withstood. It has changed hands by secession often, by siege once, by treachery twice, but never by assault. On this tower the lookout hoved. From here he kept the guard over the blue woods towards Wales. His clean old bones lie beneath the floor of the chapel now, so you must keep it for him. If you look down and are not frightened of heights, the Society for the Preservation of This and That have put up some excellent railings to preserve you from tumbling over. You can see the whole anatomy of the inner court laid out beneath you like a map. You can see the chapel, now quite open to its God, and the windows of the great hall with the solar over it. You can see the shafts of the huge chimneys and how cunningly the side flues were contrived to enter them, and the little private closets now public, and the enormous kitchen. If you are a sensible person, you will spend days there, possibly weeks, working out for yourself, by detection, which were the stables, which the mews, where were the cow buyers, the armory, the lofts, the well, the smithy, the kennel, the soldiers' quarters, the priest's room, and my lord's and ladies' chambers. Then it will all grow about you again. The little people, they were smaller than we are, and it would be a job for most of us to get inside the few bits of their armor and old gloves that remain, will hurry about in the sunshine. The sheep will baa as they always did, and perhaps from Wales there will come the of the triple-feathered arrow, which looks as if it had never moved. This place was, of course, a paradise for a boy to be in. The wart ran about it like a rabbit in its own complicated labyrinth. He knew everything, everywhere, all the special smells, good climbs, soft lairs, secret hiding places, jumps, slides, nooks, larders, and blisses. For every season he had the best place, like a cat, and he yelled and ran and fought and upset people and snoozed and daydreamed and pretended he was a knight without stopping. Just now, he was in the kennel. People in those days had rather different ideas about the training of dogs to what we have today. They did it more by love than strictness. Imagine a modern MFH, that's, I believe, a master of the hunt, going to bed with his hounds. And yet, Flavius Arrianus says that it is, quote, best of all if they can sleep with a person, because it makes them more human, and because they rejoice in the company of human beings. Also, if they have had a restless night or been internally upset, you will know of it and will not use them to hunt next day. In Sir Ector's kennel, there was a special boy called the dog boy, who lived with the hounds day and night. He was a sort of head hound, and it was his business to take them out every day for walks, to pull thorns out of their feet, keep cankers out of their ears, bind the smaller bones that got dislocated, dose them for worms, isolate and nurse them in distemper, arbitrate in their quarrels, and to sleep curled up among them at night. If one more learned quotation may be excused, this is how, later on, the Duke of York, who was killed at Agincourt, described such a boy in his Master of Game. Quote, "Also I will teach the child to lead out the hounds to scomber, twice in the day, in the morning and in the evening, so that the sun be up, especially in winter. Then he should let them run and play long in a meadow in the sun, and then comb every hound after the other, and wipe them with a great wisp of straw, and this he shall do every morning. And then he shall lead them into some fair place where tender grass grows as corn and other things, that therewith they may feed themselves, as it is medicine for them. Thus, since the boy's, quote, heart and his business be with the hounds themselves become, quote, goodly and kindly and clean, glad and joyful and playful, and goodly to all manner of folks, save to the wild beasts, to whom they should be fierce, eager, and spiteful. Sir Ector's dog boy was none other than the one who had his nose bitten off by the terrible Wat. Not having a nose like a human, and being, moreover, subjected to stone throwing by the other village children, he had become more comfortable with animals. He talked to them, not in baby talk like a maiden lady, but correctly, in their own growls and barks. They all loved him very much, and revered him for taking thorns out of their toes, and came to him with their troubles at once. He always understood immediately what was wrong, and generally he could put it right. It was nice for the dogs to have their God with them in visible form. The wart was fond of the dog boy, and thought him very clever to be able to do these things with animals, for he could make them do almost anything just by moving his hands, while the dog boy loved the wart in much the same way as his dogs loved him, and thought the wart was almost holy because he could read and write. They spent much of their time together, rolling about with the dogs in the kennel. The kennel was on the ground floor, near the mews, with a loft above it, so that it should be cool in summer and warm in winter. The hounds were alaunts, gazehounds, limers, and brachs, or braches. They were called Clumsy, Trownier, Phoebe, Cole, Girland, Talbot, Luath, Lufra, Apollon, Orthros, Bran, Gellert, Bounce, Boy, Lion, Bungie, Toby, and Diamond. The wart's own special one was called Caval, and he happened to be licking Caval's nose, not the other way around, when Merlin came in and found him. "That will come to be regarded as an insanitary habit," said Merlin, "though I cannot see it myself. After all, God made the creature's nose just as well as he made your tongue, if not better," added the philosopher pensively. The wart did not know what Merlin was talking about, but he liked him to talk. He did not like the grown-ups who talked down to him, but the ones who went on talking in their usual way, leaving him to leap along in their wake, jumping at meanings, guessing, clutching at known words, and chuckling at complicated jokes as they suddenly dawned. He had the glee of the porpoise then, pouring and leaping through strange seas. "Shall we go out?" asked Merlin. "I think it is about time we began lessons." The wart's heart sank at this. His tutor had been there a month, and it was now August, but they had done no lessons so far. Now he suddenly remembered that this was what Merlin was for, and he thought with dread of the Summulae Logicalis and the filthy astrolabe. He knew that it had to be borne, however, and got up obediently enough after giving Caval a last reluctant pat. He thought that it might not be so bad with Merlin, who might be able to make even the old Organon interesting, particularly if he would do some magic. They went into the courtyard, into a sun so burning that the heat of haymaking seemed to have been nothing. It was baking. The thunderclouds, which usually go with hot weather, were there, high columns of cumulus with glaring edges, but there was not going to be any thunder. It was too hot even for that. "If only," thought the wart, "I did not have to go into a stuffy classroom, but could take off my clothes and swim in the moat." They crossed the courtyard, having almost to take deep breaths before they darted across it, as if they were going quickly through an oven. The shade of the gatehouse was cool, but the barbican, with its close walls, was hottest of all. In one last dash across the desert, they had reached the drawbridge. Could Merlin have guessed what he was thinking? And were staring down into the moat. It was the season of water lilies. If Sir Ector had not kept one section free of them for the boys' bathing, all the water would have been covered. As it was, about 20 yards on each side of the bridge were cut each year, and one could dive in from the bridge itself. The moat was deep. It was used as a stew, so that the inhabitants of the castle could have fish on Fridays, and for this reason the architects had been careful not to let the drains and sewers run into it. It was stocked with fish every year. "I wish I was a fish," said the wart. "What sort of fish?" It was almost too hot to think about this, but the wart stared down into the cool amber depths where a school of small perch were aimlessly hanging about. "I think I should like to be a perch," he said. "They're braver than the silly roach, and not quite so slaughterous as the pike are." Merlin took off his hat, raising his staff of lignum vitae politely in the air, and said slowly, and then, this is all backwards, but so I'm going to just read it as best I can. Snilerem snemmelpmok ot enut pen dna liu yildnik tepeka sit yab sa a hesith. And that last part is to change a boy into a fish, basically. Immediately, there was a loud blowing of seashells, conches, and so forth, and a stout, jolly-looking gentleman appeared, seated on a well-blown cloud up above the battlements. He had an anchor tattooed on his stomach, and a handsome mermaid with Mabel written under her on his chest. He ejected a quid of tobacco, nodded affably to Merlin, and pointed his trident at the wart. The wart found he had no clothes on. He found that he had tumbled off the drawbridge, landing with a smack on his side in the water. He found that the moat and the bridge had grown hundreds of times bigger. He knew that he was turning into a fish. "Oh, Merlin," he cried, "please come too." "For this once," said a large and solemn tench beside his ear, "I will come. But in future you will have to go by yourself. Education is experience, and the essence of experience is self-reliance." The wart found it difficult to be a new kind of creature. It was no good trying to swim like a human being, for it made him go corkscrew, and much too slowly. He did not know how to swim like a fish. "Not like that," said the tench in ponderous tones. "Put your chin on your left shoulder and do jackknives. Never mind about the fins to begin with." The wart's legs had fused together into his backbone, and his feet and toes had become a tail fin. His arms had become two more fins, of a delicate pink, and he had sprouted some more somewhere about his stomach. His head faced over his shoulder, so that when he bent in the middle, his toes were moving toward his ear instead of toward his forehead. He was a beautiful olive green, with rather scratchy plate armor all over him and dark bands down his sides. He was not sure which were his sides and which were his back and front, but what now appeared to be his belly had an attractive whitish color, while his back was armed with a splendid great fin that could be erected for war and had spikes in it. He did jackknives, as the tench directed, and found that he was swimming vertically downward into the mud. "Use your feet to turn to left or right," said the tench, "and spread those fins on your tummy to keep level. You are living in two planes now, not one." The wart found that he could keep more or less level by altering the inclination of his arm fins and the ones on his stomach. He swam feebly off, enjoying himself very much. "Come back," said the tench. "You must learn to swim before you can dart." The wart returned to his tutor in a series of zigzags and remarked, "I do not seem to quite keep straight." "The trouble with you is that you do not swim from the shoulder. You swim as if you were a boy, bending at the hips. Try doing your jackknives right from the neck downward, and move your body exactly the same amount to the right as you are going to move it to the left. Put your back into it." Wart gave 2 terrific kicks and vanished altogether in a clump of mare's tail several yards away. "That's better," said the tench, now out of sight in the murky olive water, and the Wart backed himself out of his tangle with infinite trouble by wriggling his arm fins. He undulated back toward the voice in one terrific shove to show off. "Good," said the tench as they collided end to end, "but direction is the better part of valor. Try if you can do this one," it added. Without apparent exertion of any kind, it swam off backward under a water lily. Without apparent exertion, but the Wart, who was an enterprising learner, had been watching the slightest movement of its fins. He moved his own fins anti-clockwise, gave the tip of his tail a cunning flick, and was lying alongside the tench. "Splendid," said Merlin. "Let us go for a little swim." The Wart was on an even keel now and reasonably able to move about. He had leisure to look at the extraordinary universe in which the tattooed gentleman's trident had plunged him. It was different from the universe to which he had been accustomed. For one thing, the heaven or sky above him was now a perfect circle. The horizon had closed to this. In order to imagine yourself into the Wart's position, you would have to picture a round horizon a few inches about your head instead of the flat horizon which you usually see. Under this horizon of air, you would have to imagine another horizon of underwater, spherical and practically upside down, for the surface of the water acted partly as a mirror to what was below it. It is difficult to imagine. What makes it a great deal more difficult to imagine is that everything which human beings would consider to be above the water level was fringed with all the colors of the spectrum. For instance, if you had happened to be fishing for the Wart, he would have seen you, at the rim of the tea saucer, which was the upper air to him, not as one person waving a fishing rod, but as 7 people whose outlines were red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, all waving the same rod whose colors were as varied. In fact, you would have been a rainbow man to him, a beacon of flashing and radiating colors which ran into one another and had rays all about. You would have burned upon the water, like Cleopatra in the poem. The next most lovely thing was that the Wart had no weight. He was not earthbound any more, and did not have to plod along on a flat surface, pressed down by gravity and the weight of the atmosphere. He could do what men have always wanted to do, that is, fly. There is practically no difference between flying in the water and flying in the air. The best of it was that he did not have to fly in a machine by pulling levers and sitting still, but could do it with his own body. It was like the dreams people have. Just as they were going to swim off on their tour of inspection, a timid young roach appeared from between 2 waving bottle bushes of mare's tail and hung about, looking pale with agitation. It looked at them with big, apprehensive eyes, and evidently wanted something, but could not make up its mind. "Approach," said Merlin gravely. At this the roach rushed up like a hen, burst into tears, and began stammering its message. "If you please, doctor," stammered the poor creature, gabbling so that they could scarcely understand what it said. "We have such a dreadful case of something or other in our family, and we wondered if you could spare the time. It's our dear mamma, who will swim all the time upside down, and she does look so horrible and speaks so strange that we really thought she ought to have a doctor, if it wouldn't be too much. Clara says to say so, sir, if you see what I mean." Here the poor roach began fizzing so much, what with its stammer and its tearful disposition, that it became quite inarticulate, and could only stare at Merlin with mournful eyes. "Never mind, my little man," said Merlin. "There, there, lead me to your dear mamma, and we shall see what we can do." They all three swam off into the murk under the drawbridge, upon their errand of mercy. "Neurotic, these roach," whispered Merlin behind his fin. "It is probably a case of nervous hysteria, a matter for the psychologist rather than the physician." The roach's mamma was lying on her back, as he had described. She was squinting, had folded her fins on her chest, and every now and then she blew a bubble. All her children were gathered round her in a circle, and every time she blew they nudged each other and gasped. She had a seraphic smile on her face. "Well, well, well," said Merlin, putting on his best bedside manner. "And how is Mrs. Roach today?" He patted the young roaches on the head and advanced with stately motions toward his patient. It should perhaps be mentioned that Merlin was a ponderous, deep-beamed fish of about 5 pounds, leather-colored, with small scales, adipose in his fins, rather slimy, and having a bright marigold eye. A respectable figure. Mrs. Roach held out a languid fin, sighed emphatically, and said, "Ah, doctor, so you've come at last." Said the physician in his deepest tone. Then he told everybody to close their eyes. The wart peeped, and he began to swim around the invalid in a slow and stately dance. As he danced, he sang. His song was this: "Therapeutic, elephantic, diagnosis, boom! Pancreatic, microstatic, antitoxic, doom! With a normal catabolism, gabbalism, and babblism, snip, snap, snorum, cut out his abdonorum, dyspepsia, anemia, toxemia. 1, 2, 3, and out goes he, with a fall de roll de rido for the 5-guinea fee." At the end of the song, he was swimming round his patient so close that he actually touched her, stroking his brown, smooth-scaled flanks against her more rattly pale ones. Perhaps he was healing her with his slime, for all fishes are said to go to the tench for medicine. Or perhaps it was by touch, or massage, or hypnotism. In any case, Mrs. Roach suddenly stopped squinting, turned the right way up, and said, "Oh, doctor, dear doctor, I feel I could eat a little lobworm now." "No lobworm," said Merlin, "not for 2 days. I shall give you a prescription for a strong broth of algae. Every 2 hours, Mrs. Roach. We must build up your strength, you know. After all, Rome was not built in a day." Then he patted all the little roaches once more, told them to grow up into brave little fish, and swam off with an air of importance into the gloom. As he swam, he puffed his mouth in and out. "What did you mean by that about Rome?" asked the wart when they were out of earshot. "Heaven knows." They swam along, Merlin occasionally advising him to put his back into it when he forgot, and the strange underwater world began to dawn about them, deliciously cool after the heat of the upper air. The great forests of weed were delicately traced, and in them there hung motionless many schools of sticklebacks, learning to do their physical exercises in strict unison. On the word 1, they all lay still. At 2, they faced about. At 3, they all shot together into a cone whose apex was a bit of something to eat. Water snails slowly ambled about on the stems of the lilies or under their leaves, while freshwater mussels lay on the bottom, doing nothing in particular. Their flesh was salmon pink, like a very good strawberry cream ice. The small congregations of perch — it was a strange thing, but all the bigger fish seemed to have hidden themselves — had delicate circulation so that they blushed or grew pale as easily as a lady in a Victorian novel. Only their blush was a deep olive color, and it was the blush of rage. Whenever Merlin and his companions swam past them, they raised their spiky dorsal fins in menace and only lowered them when they saw that Merlin was a tench. The black bars on their sides make them look as if they had been grilled, and these also could become darker or lighter. Once the two travelers passed under a swan. The white creature floated above like a zeppelin, all indistinct except what was under the water. And I am going to actually stop there because there's still more of this adventure to come, and it's just about to begin. Yes. Okay, so forgive me for that rather abrupt stop, but I just suddenly realized I probably should have stopped as soon as Merlin finished healing the perch's mother. No, the roach, the little roach fish. Anyway, so with that, I am going to stop for the night, and I thank you all very much for joining me. It is always a huge pleasure to see you all. I see James and Ron also showed up, and probably several others who I haven't. Jeremy showed up. Hello, Jeremy. And Jay. What a pleasure to see you, Jay. And I think I said hello to all the rest of these folks at one point or another. So anyway, that is where I'm going to stop for tonight because there's more adventures in the moat still to come, including a meeting up with a rather frightening fellow. But I will save that for later today for 7 to 7 p.m. reading. And of course, for all the rest of you, it will be available. If you can't listen to it live, it will be available on the YouTube versions, which Chris so kindly puts up. So with that, I say thank you very, very much, as always, for the kindness of your company. It is much appreciated. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones, friends, everybody, and try to help out where you can. That's kind of something that we can all do, and if we all do that, well, life is just a lot better, and everything just gets a lot better, and eventually the world gets better. That is my solemn belief. So, with that, I say once again, thank you very much. A pleasure to spend time. Peace. Be good. See some of you later today, and see the rest of you next week, same time. Excuse the cough. And yeah, that's it. Ciao.